21st century luxury at sea. One of today's great liners, P&O's Aurora. These P&O Princess cruises really pamper their passengers. As they sail south, the deckhead coverings slide back to let the sunshine in. The giant deck tennis court can even cope with football and cricket. But inside this ultra-modern ship, there's all of the opulence and splendor of the great liners of many years ago. State-of-the-art and state-of-the-eat, two of Aurora's attractive restaurants, Medina and Alexandria, offering everyone top-class service. Many of the staff come from families who've served aboard P&O ships for generations. A different menu every day to suit all tastes and needs. 7 courses, very smart but very relaxed. The world's finest wines to choose from. And you can afford to do this every happy day at sea. There are many other eating places aboard, such as the Bistro Café Bordeaux, open 24 hours a day, offering tasty food with Gallic flair and perfect for a midnight feast. You can take your chances in the casino, bingo, all the sevens. Big screen shoot 'em up for the kids in the Intergalactica Games Room. While on the many screens in the Champions Bar, the grown-ups can keep up with satellite sport. Email and surfing the net, of course. And Raffles is one of the 12 bars aboard Aurora, each with its own particular atmosphere. Or you can find a peaceful spot on your own, get dolled up, work out in the tip-top gym. And if you're a prosperous penthouse person, you can spread yourself across 2 floors. There's a grand piano, 2 balconies, and your own butler to tend to every need. The luxury liners of P&O Princess Cruises are small cities afloat, where you can wander anywhere around town to find your choice of nightlife, clap along with the contortions of the cabaret, or even take steps yourself in a real Scottish style.
I told you it was perfectly acceptable.
You did?
Yes, I did, so admit it.
Take in a show, have a good laugh. Life aboard is very different to cruising on the liners 100 years ago. In the early decades of P&O's history, these aircraft seemed to pose no threat. Mass global jet setting was still very much science fiction. The pace of life was such that slower and more sedate travel aboard the great liners was infinitely preferable to risky pioneering passenger planes. Navigation at sea was sure and secure, while pilots still flew by the seat of their pants, often finding their way by flying low and reading the names written on the roofs of railway stations and other big buildings. No, this was the growth era for the great liner industry, when people dreamed of sailing aboard such great ships as Orient Line's Ormond. Here she's set to sail to Australia via the Far East. And British India's Moulder is sailing from London's Royal Docks. Both companies and their ships were closely associated with P&O. The P&O story starts in 1837 when Brodie McGee Wilcox, Arthur Anderson and Captain Richard Bourne set up the Peninsular Steam Navigation Company, running services between London, Spain and Portugal. P&O, the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, was formed in 1840 and services started to Australia in 1845. And soon P&O ships were to be seen everywhere. This is flourishing Port Said at the turn of the last century, featuring many famous business names: Nestlé, Simon Arzt, Thomas Cook and the Eastern Telegraph Company. P&O was very much there too. From Port Said into the Suez Canal. Before this wonderful waterway was created, P&O had to use a tortuous overland route across the Isthmus of Suez. We can't show you those terrible treks, but our archives do take us back over around 100 years to chart the history of this great company and its many associates. They all suffered very heavy losses during World War I. P&O alone lost 13 passenger ships. But after the carnage under its inspirational chairman Lord Inchcape, P&O set about restoring and expanding its fleet. By 1930, the line had 20 new passenger-carrying vessels. They were ships that set new standards, like the 17,000 gross ton Ranpura. Here she's en route to Tilbury from Bombay. As she passes, a friendly wave from all aboard. And there was always an atmosphere of excitement about the next port of call. Visits to places such as Aden, which held all sorts of mysterious charm. Passengers are taking an adventurous trip ashore from their ship, the 20,000 gross ton Maloya, which will be taking them on to Bombay in Australia. Maloya and her sister Multan were P&O's first ships of this size and the largest vessels using the Suez Canal at this time. Maloya overtakes a tanker, but she was far from being a fast ship. Her steam reciprocating machinery was barely able to achieve 17 knots flat out. But she did have a wide open promenade deck, which went all around the ship and was to become a welcome feature of most P&O ships, helping to make them feel more comfortable when sailing through the hot, sticky days and nights of the tropics. Great excitement aboard Maloya as she arrives at Bombay. For many passengers, this is the end of their voyage aboard this great ship as they prepare to disembark in India. For some first-time visitors, the huge docks come as a real surprise. Vast warehouses, cranes and buildings, a product of massive British colonial commitment to empire building. Then there's the bustling big city itself, but in contrast there's poverty and squalor in the streets. Back to sea and the comforts on board a P&O Group ship. Life was leisurely, laid back and completely stress-free. A cocktail before the main event of the day, dinner. This was the era when Great Britain was at the very forefront of passenger ship development. Every other merchant vessel afloat flew the red ensign. Passengers travelling first class were often highly placed civil servants, either returning from a spell of home leave or about to take up a new position in the colonies. And there were very wealthy British tourists. Meals were served in a plush restaurant with sparkling table silver and crisp, freshly laundered linen. Maloya and Multan were also noted for the high quality of their second-class accommodation and markedly better public spaces. Above all, they were very seaworthy. But unlike superliners of the 21st century, Maloya's nightlife was mostly restricted to dancing on deck. However, technology has done nothing for deck tennis. This simple, time-passing pleasure is still the popular game it always was 100 years ago, even if we have abandoned tartan skirts and tank-top pullovers. And deck skittles are definitely no longer on today's sporting menu. As for swimming in an improvised pool such as this, made out of timber and canvas, people today would be asking for their money back. But in the days before the luxuries of air conditioning, these passengers would have absolutely relished its cooling qualities. P&O were the major shareholders in Orient Line, their main rival on the Australian mail and passenger service. Orient Line were also at the forefront of passenger line development, and their 24,000 gross ton Orion was an impressive sight when it reached Sydney on its maiden voyage in 1935. The crews of both P&O and Orient liners had very close links, many serving with both companies during their time at sea. They were always ready and eager to join the quayside crowds in celebrating each sailing in spectacular style. On the other side of the world, Maloya's sister, the Multan, set sail from Tilbury with some 650 passengers aboard. She began her maiden voyage to Sydney on the 21st of December 1923, sailing via Colombo and Melbourne. Both she and her sister gave P&O tremendous value, remaining in service until the mid-1950s. This is the 16,000 gross ton Mongolia sailing down the English Channel at the start of a 16-day Mediterranean cruise. In the 1930s, cruising grew in popularity, and several P&O ships were given a new lease of life. And how? Look at the passengers. So this is how our parents and grandparents used to behave. Life isn't nearly as much fun on a tugboat. Seeing that means it's the first port of call at Gibraltar. The pilot boat comes alongside and there's much excitement on board Mongolia. The Great Rock looms above the busy port, and there's more fun in store ashore on Britain's tiny 4-square-mile Mediterranean outpost. The deep blue sea looks so much more inviting than the ship's campus pool. Then up the coast of Spain and on to the next stop, Barcelona. It's one of the greatest ports in the Med and a major industrial centre. But Barcelona is also a big city with many sights to see. The classic tourist pose for the camera. Did these P&O passengers even dream that this had become part of the archive of great liners' history? And Barcelona offered city-wide vistas from its forerunner to London's big wheel. Awful or awesome, depending on your taste, a must-see was, and still is, the much unfinished Sagrada Familia church. Few ports had the quayside facilities they have today, and going ashore involved packing into an uncomfortable and noisy tender. The cramped convoys amused the locals no end. From a distance, ports always look much more peaceful and welcoming. Once the ship berths, you realize just how serene life on board has been. Get ready for the frenzy and try to be patient. Amid the chaos of a Tangier quayside, taxis line up to take the trippers on a guided tour. Other determined souls haggle with the wily Moroccan traders in the hope of getting a real bargain. Wise ones invest in a sun umbrella at any price. Tangier was passed from empire to empire, British, Portuguese and Spanish. In the 1920s it was an international zone hosting 8 countries with 3 languages and 2 currencies. A free port where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic. After a busy time ashore in this wicked city, passengers were happy to make their way back to the peaceful routines aboard. As the day begins to draw to a close, it's time to sail on to the next stop on this Mediterranean cruise. Lying ahead are days free of any distractions. Enjoy or keep out of the heat. Above all, let time drift slowly by. Like many P&O liners, the Mongolia had wide-open decks, which made her ideal for cruising. But the entertainment was very much self-made. Here's how an article in a newspaper of the time described a day's program at sea. Before breakfast, several vigorous circuits of the promenade deck. Between breakfast and lunch, deck games and a swim. In the afternoon, sunbathing and the tropical heat. After tea, more deck games or reading. Following dinner may come bridge or dancing. And last of all, to lend a touch of magic to a well-filled day would be a stroll on the moonlit deck, where you might delude yourself into thinking you have but to stretch up your hand to touch the stars. Built by Armstrong, Whitworth and Company at their Newcastle yards in 1923, the Mongolia's twin screws were propelled by steam turbines which gave her a service speed of 16 knots. She could carry 410 passengers and was originally designed for P&O's London-Bombay service. Here's a complete mystery. What are these passengers doing dangling a hat over the side of the ship like this? Are they trying to catch flying fish? Answers on a postcard or email to the producers of this program, please. As on most ships of this period, the Mongolia swimming pool, despite being small, basic and very crowded, was the meeting point and centre of her social activity. Many a fling or lasting romance started here. And if romance was on the menu, the merest provocative posing by the young ladies was enough to draw a crowd of potential partners. Perhaps that's why they didn't need cruise directors and organised entertainment. The Mongolia had an interesting and varied career. In 1938, she was transferred to the New Zealand Shipping Company, another company associated with P&O, and renamed the Rimutaka. She remained in popular service with them until 1950. She then joined Incres Line as the Europa on the transatlantic service and was again renamed as Nassau in 1951 and refitted for cruising. Finally, she was sent to be scrapped in 1965 after giving over 40 years' service. Every prominent shipping company had one ship that, for whatever reasons, just seemed to stand out from all the rest. And in the 1930s, for P&O, their pride of the fleet was the magnificent Viceroy of India. Here she's on an Atlantic Islands cruise. On carefully restored colour film, this is a wonderful memory. Under the command of Captain E. Carter, she's about to take her 600 passengers on a North Cape cruise. The beautifully appointed Viceroy of India was built at the Glasgow yards of Andrew Stephen and Sons in 1929. Her accommodation was truly astounding and more akin to a high-class country hotel. As you can see in this series of pictures of her first-class facilities, starting with the smoking room, with its beautifully decorated high stained glass ceiling. The comfortable and homely reading and writing room. The indoor swimming pool, which was a rare feature on any long voyage ship in those days. The opulent dining room with its impressive pillars. And a deluxe suite adorned with intricate inlaid wooden panelling. But the high standards of that accommodation weren't just the preserve of her first-class passengers. They were enjoyed by all who sailed aboard this beautiful ship. The Viceroy of India took P&O into a new, even higher league. She was originally built for P&O's London-Bombay service. Although P&O wasn't renowned for being revolutionary in terms of ship design, in the building of the Viceroy of India they made the bold decision to power her twin screws with turbo-electric engines, giving her an ultra-smooth service speed of 19 knots. During her summer cruises, she was a regular and much welcomed visitor to the beautiful city of Stockholm, where crowds flocked to see her. Sadly, the Viceroy of India was to become one of P&O's greatest losses in World War II, torpedoed and sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of Algeria on the 11th of November 1942. More very rare restored colour film from the 1930s allows us to take a closer look at Orient Line's handsome Orion. She was their first liner to have a very attractive corn-coloured hull. Here she's commanded by Captain A.L. Owens and off on a North Cape cruise. With her ultra-modern, spacious accommodation and wide-open deck, she was Orient Line's answer to P&O's famous Strath boats. She was considered by most to be the superior liner of the day on the Australian service. She also became a very popular cruise ship. The fares for this cruise in the 1930s started at 22 guineas a berth. As Orion arrives at Tilbury and company officials and shore gangs wait to board her, it's worth reflecting on the pride felt for this great ship by all who worked and sailed with her. In her long career, she carried hundreds of thousands of troops to war, passengers to new lives in Australia, and on exciting and adventurous cruises to places all over the world. In October 1963, after 28 years of faithful service, she was sent to be scrapped. In the 1930s, P&O introduced their new breed of liner, those Strath boats. We're joining the Strathmore under the command of Captain F.E. French as she enters the port of Venice on a Mediterranean cruise. Fares for this started at 34 guineas for a first-class berth and 21 guineas for a tourist-class one. A small price to pay to see this magical city before it became awash with mass tourism. Once again, we're fortunate to be able to show rare colour archive film to help give us a real feel of what it was like to have sailed aboard these celebrated P&O Strath liners. Vickers Armstrong built 5 of these great ships at their Barrow and Furness yards. The Strathnaver in 1931, Strathaired in 1932, Strathmore in 1935, and the Stratheden and Strathallan in 1937. The cash is flowing into the Daily Tote as Strathmore's 950 passengers are all busy trying to forecast the distance the ship will cover today. The 24,000 gross ton liner is in her element, running smoothly through the warm blue Mediterranean. Properly constructed tiled swimming pools have now replaced the old wooden and canvas contraptions used in the elder ship, something greatly appreciated by the Strathmore's passengers. There's also much more deck space to sprawl out on. A lot of time is spent nourishing and cultivating the all-important suntans to show off when the passengers get home. As they sail in close to the Turkish coast, excitement builds as the pilot boat comes up to meet them. The 5 Strath sisters in their all-white livery soon became known around the world as the Great White Liners, and their passengers were just as smart. It's amazing just how people dressed up in those days. Overcoats, white suits, no shorts and t-shirts, not the done thing at all. When we go ashore, we'll show the natives. Although the Strathmore and her sisters made very popular cruise ships, they were originally built for P&O's long-haul service to Australia via Bombay. The Strathnaver and Strathaired were propelled by steam turboelectric engines, giving them a service speed of 17.5 knots, whereas Strathmore, Stratheden and Strathallan were driven by steam turbines, which gave them the better service speed of 19 knots. Strathmore broke the then existing record between London and Bombay, even surpassing Italy's pride and joy, the Victoria, on that Indian service. P&O always had British officers and some European crew, but mostly they were Goanese and Lascars from India. But whoever looked after the passengers fortunate enough to sail aboard the Strathmore and her sisters, the crew made sure they were all duly pampered. The Strath ships carried countless thousands of passengers in style like this, but there were dark days ahead, and the Strathallan was destined to be another tragic loss during World War II. Another P&O liner specially built for the Far Eastern service was the 16,000 gross ton Canton. She's getting ready to depart on a voyage to Bombay. En route, Gibraltar is always a welcome sight to outward-bound passengers, knowing the turbulent Bay of Biscay is safely behind them and blue skies and warm blue seas lie ahead. Launched on April the 14th, 1938 at the Govan yards of Alexander Stephen and Sons, Canton was another very popular liner with very pleasing accommodation. This was the spacious and agreeably furnished first-class lounge. And this, the very adequately furnished tourist lounge. Canton's 298 first-class passengers ate in stately surroundings. There were fewer frills for her 244 tourist-class passengers, but the food was good. A first-class deluxe cabin keeping you cool by being port-side out and starboard home, very posh. As the Canton prepares to make her way through the Suez Canal, mooring boats are secured both forward and aft, ready to run the mooring ropes ashore. Not to miss an opportunity, the boatmen are also busily selling souvenirs. Egyptian sandals, very best price for you, madam. Finest quality, handmade by my brothers. The canal journey is now a relatively comfortable experience. Think back again to the days before it was built, when intrepid P&O passengers were subjected to a hellish 84-mile desert journey from Cairo to Suez. Scorching by day, icy by night, 36 hours crammed together in stuffy horse-drawn buggies. Camels were used to carry the mail bags and luggage, and as they were so much faster, they always arrived well ahead. So P&O staff had to plead for connecting ships not to sail before their exhausted passengers arrived. But thanks to the French-inspired and engineered Suez Canal, the Canton takes us through into the Red Sea and on to Aden. In these days, Aden is still a very important British military base. Canton's arrival adds an attractive feature to the otherwise very ugly skyline, with her all-white livery and her yellow funnel. The last P&O liner to be built before World War II, she originally had a black hull, light stone superstructure and black funnel. Although Aden is a very unattractive port of call for the 440 passengers, it's a necessary one for Canton to bunker. They pass the 8 hours or so spent there just exercising their legs and taking a boat trip around the shore. Not a lot to entertain the eye except the apparatus of oil refineries. Thank goodness to get away to the open sea again and a breeze. Southeast now to India. The Bombay pilot boat is a welcome sight for Canton's passengers. After Suez and Aden, they're ready for some fun ashore. The ship's steam turbines have faithfully propelled her twin screws at a tidy service speed of 18 knots, and the journey from London to Bombay has taken just 16 days. For some of Canton's passengers, it's time for family reunions and the chance to enjoy a swim or just a paddle in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. And too soon we're underway again, this time heading towards our final outward port of call, Hong Kong. way back in England, making her way out to sea is one of Canton's older and slightly smaller sisters, P&O's 14,000 gross ton Corfu. And this is very much a family trip, and as soon as the weather allows, it'll be everyone on deck. Once the Corfu has done a good few nautical miles, the fun will begin in earnest. These are days when children still derive so much pleasure out of even the simplest of games and competitions. It's also a time when people of all ages are much more willing to socialise and join in the fun, even if it does mean making a bit of a fool of yourself. Corfu's bridge looks positively antique compared with the huge high-tech ones found aboard the superliners of the 21st century. But here, in her heyday, she's state-of-the-art and the pride of her officers and crew as they transit the Suez Canal. It'd be interesting to know just how many times the ships of P&O and its associated companies passed through the canal and the millions of pounds they paid for the right to do so. There's great excitement aboard the Corfu as we pass a homeward-bound Canton. Long before the advent of computers, faxes and emails, P&O officers and crews had a relatively stress-free life, with only very important communications being relayed to the ship whilst at sea. Even this slight intrusion into their privacy was fiercely resisted by seagoing captains in the early years of radio communication, when they had to fly a kite from the ship to pick up the occasional transmission from head office. At one stage, they even threatened to go on strike unless the practice stopped. Perhaps the captains and senior officers of the 21st century superliners, faced with hundreds of electronic messages every day, wished they'd succeeded. The Corfu's home port was London's Royal Docks, but she used Southampton to board and discharge her 400 passengers. Like most P&O ships, she had British officers and mostly Indian crew who were extremely loyal. Built at the Glasgow yards of Alexander Stephen and Sons in 1931, the Corfu originally had two funnels and P&O's then traditional black hull colouring. While at sea, maintenance on board is a constant process to keep the ship up to the company's high standards. As with all British-registered ships, emergency drill is an absolute necessity and a regular part of life at sea for all aboard. Mind you, if you're a dummy casualty, it's fun to get all this care and attention. Like her two sisters, Canton and Carthage, Corfu has lots of children among her passengers. There's always plenty of things for them to do, creating fond memories of their voyage that will last a lifetime. Dad, I steered the ship today. And there'll be the odd storm or two. Calm waters now on the equator, and the crossing the line ceremony is one of the highlights of Corfu's voyages. For passengers and crew, it's a chance to be very silly indeed and let off lots of steam. An occasion to be enjoyed by old and young alike. Time for a close shave, sir? Ooh. Or an unplanned plunge. Another memorable event of the voyage for the youngsters is their fancy dress party. Looking at this rare old film, it's strange to think that these children are now grand or more likely great-grandparents. Although I doubt if this particular granny is still quite so willing to show off her undies. When she left the quayside in Southampton, Corfu's orchestra would always play the song On a Slow Boat to China. But this was a little unfair, as she wasn't that slow. Her steam turbines propelled her twin screws through the water at a gentle service speed of 17 knots. Children played, grown-ups made new friends, and everyone enjoyed magical days at sea. Corfu arrives safely in Hong Kong harbour after 4 weeks in sailing from London. She's called at Southampton, Algiers, Port Said, Aden, Bombay, Colombo, Penang and Singapore. Now for this unique mixture of East meets West. Even these many years ago, the skyscrapers are creeping up. Chinese coolies have come aboard to sand down the deck and suture the outside of the ship from top to bottom. Corfu's turnaround time in Hong Kong will be about 5 days. Her crew will have plenty of time to go ashore, visit a bar or two and buy presents for friends and family back home. There are masses of cargo to discharge. And for the local children, there are loose apples to beg for as the hold empties. With this happy scene, it's difficult to imagine how, just a few years before this, the Corfu and her sister Carthage had been living completely different lives, confronting the daily dangers faced in World War II as armed merchant cruisers. The men and ships of the merchant navy are still very much the unsung heroes of both world wars. They faced constant danger and thousands sacrificed their lives for their country. Among the thousands of ships that were sunk, many were operated by P&O and its associated companies, including the Rawalpindi, Strathallan, Rangatani, and the magnificent Viceroy of India. The merchant crews and ships played a crucial role, carrying over 1 million fighting men to the battlefields. At the end of the war, P&O's own fleet of 20 passenger liners was reduced to just 11. Now the war is over and the guns of anger have fallen silent. It's time for Britain, with its heavily bombed docks and depleted merchant fleet, to start the long and difficult task of trying to rebuild their former glory. Once again, driving east out of London to Tilbury, there's every chance you'll see the magnificent spectacle of the great P&O liners back there again, towering above the busy quaysides. A boat train arrives from London full of excited passengers about to join the Stratheden. But this is no pleasure cruise. They'll sail all the way to Australia, very many of them to start a new life and never to return to their homeland. This luggage is all some of them have. Even during these days of severe food rationing, ample stores have to be loaded aboard for the long voyage. So, with these and many other voyages, the resurgence of the British Merchant Navy and P&O is beginning. Embark on a life-changing adventure, all their communications. Soon, the quaysides of the great ports are completely lined with ships. Many of them are new ones from P&O, such as the cargo passenger ship Stuart, berthed in London's Royal Docks and loading cargo in readiness to sail on a voyage to the Far East. Further downriver in the port of Tilbury is the Juzan, one of the new breed of liners from P&O, and their competitive response to the new ships introduced by Orient Lines. With the help of more carefully restored rare archive film, we've managed to recreate the atmosphere and feeling of what it was like to have sailed aboard such ships as the Juzan and Surat. We can at least get a glimpse of how it felt to be with P&O in such exciting, adventurous days. This is an era thought by many people to have been the heyday of British merchant shipping. With over 1,000 very excited passengers aboard, the 24,000 gross ton Juzan sets out on one of her very first commercial voyages, a 14-day Mediterranean cruise. Back in London, one of Surat's sisters is also outward bound on a voyage to the Far East. The 9,000 gross ton Surat was built at the Newcastle yards of Vickers Armstrong in 1948 for P&O's Far East service. Powered by steam turbines producing 13,000 shp, she had a service speed of 17 knots. The Juzan was built in 1949 at the Vickers Armstrong yards at Barrow-in-Furness, also for P&O's Far East service, including Japan. Like Orient Lines or Cadiz, she bristled with all the very latest technology of the day. At her smooth-running heart, her team of engineers took loving pride in their new charge. Like most P&O ships of this period, Juzan was also powered by steam turbines, which propelled her twin screws to a service speed of 22 knots. Controlling the catering operation was just as precise a business as running those turbines. The Juzan was P&O's second post-war replacement liner for the Far East service. With the company anticipating a greater demand for cruising, she was designed to be slightly smaller than the 28,000 gross tons of other post-war liners. But passengers' appetites were just as big. As for officers and most of the crew, they were European. The average wage was only about £40 a month, but these were the days when people went to sea more for the excitement and adventure than the money. And just to serve aboard the Juzan was something to be extremely proud of. Cooks, laundrymen, pursers, many different jobs to do. Indeed, her 572 crew members came from all walks of life and from every part of the United Kingdom. A bellboy from Belfast, a waiter from Wapping, a stewardess from Sutton, or a captain from Cardiff. No matter who you were or where you came from, you were also one of the crew. On British merchant ships of that time, there was tremendous camaraderie. Although a little more basic than the lavishly equipped superliners of the 21st century, Juzan had all the facilities necessary to deal with the demands of her passengers, including lots of wide-open deck space for young and old to indulge in that all-important ritual of sun worship. A mature game of deck quoits in and around the swimming pool. and doing the sorts of things that people love to do aboard a ship on a cruise. Suzanne passes Gibraltar. Are those rain clouds over the rock? No, ma'am, says the steward. I've been checking the forecast. Sun all the way through the Met. Down below, in the purser's office, there's always a mountain of work to be done. Practically all administrative matters have to be dealt with on board, all in pounds, shillings and pence, balanced to the nearest farthing. The Suzanne was the largest and fastest liner ever built by a British company for the Far East service, sailing from London to Gibraltar, Naples, Port Said, Aden, Bombay, Colombo, Penang, Singapore, Hong Kong, Kobe and Yokohama. P&O's Sarah also carried passengers, but only a mere 10, and this was because had she carried more than 12, she'd have been required to carry a ship's doctor, an expense shipping companies of the day could ill afford. The payload was in the cargo. P&O cargo ships sailed to just about every corner of the world. In part 2 of 100 Years of P&O, we'll take a closer look at some of the many vessels that served this great fleet. In 1968, the Surat was renamed Pando Head and was finally sent to be scrapped in 1972. Back now, though, to Suzanne, and some of her crew are enjoying time off on a warm Mediterranean shore before going back aboard to help her passengers party their way through their very special cruise. Suzanne certainly had a very varied and interesting career. In 1959, she undertook P&O's first full round-the-world voyage, calling at 24 ports in 92 days. And in 1963, as P&O started to expand its liner services worldwide, she made her first visit to Melbourne and Sydney. Sadly, like all ships that reach the end of their seagoing life, Suzanne was simply sent for scrap in 1973. She was always one of the best-loved liners in the P&O fleet and is still missed by many. In the second part of this special tribute to 100 years of P&O, we'll take a look at many of the other great ships who helped to make P&O such a major player on the world's maritime stage. Ships such as the Arcadia, Iberia and the Himalaya. Also the Great Orient liners, Orsova, Oronsay and Orcades, as they became a fully integrated part of the P&O passenger liner fleet. Using mostly film never made public before, we'll also take a closer look at some of the famous shipping companies that were part of the P&O group and the many different vessels they operated, including ocean liners, dry cargo ships and tankers. And we'll remember P&O's own fleet of cargo vessels, including such handsome ships as the 8,000 gross ton Bendigo. We'll follow P&O's interest in overseas shipping companies such as the Union Steamship Company in New Zealand. We'll look at the introduction and growth of its UK-based ferry operations. The liners, past and present, operated under the flag of Princess Cruises. The building, launch and career of the last ship to be operated by Orient Lines, the magnificent record-breaking Oriana. Of course, this production just wouldn't be near complete without the story of Canberra, perhaps the most loved of all the great liners that served P&O. And we'll end with the triumph of Canberra's Falklands return, and the great liners operated by P&O Princess Cruises today.
We are